y'all. I hope you're each having a wonderful day. And this is Keith, so say hello to him. I'll be introducing him to you today. So before we start, I want to preface this series real quick. I wanted to tell y'all about all the characters that I've used in animations and things on this channel. But before I do that, I have to kind of explain. They come from 3 different realms of thought, I guess you can call it. And those 3 are from personal vent art kind of characters, collaborative writings, and some of my own stories. So today's Keith, which he is from some role plays and collaborative writing that I've done with friends. And I'll explain what I mean by roleplay if you don't know already. So, according to the dictionary, role-playing is the acting out of the part of a particular person or character. And that can mean a lot of different things, D&D, training or psychotherapy technique, live action role-playing, video games or like RPG video games, or that random class activity that you did where you had to like pretend you were Anne Frank, in front of your whole English class, and it was really embarrassing. But when I use it in this context, I'm talking about collaborative writing where you go somewhere like Google Chats or Discord or something like that, and you just write your characters interacting with each other. That can have a plot and a setting. Sometimes it doesn't. The ones I was a part of were mostly our characters randomly appearing in weird empty spaces and just interacting, having a good time. It was very exciting. Anyways, Keith's story starts on the fateful day of June 13th. Keith came into existence. I just kind of made him up as I went. He had almost no plan from the beginning, but at this point he's become like super fleshed out, and I think he's one of the most detailed characters out of all characters that I have, and he's definitely my absolute favorite. Keith has about 3 stages in his life, which I will label 25-year-old, being an angry old man, boredom, entity, life lesson time, and happy, really cool young dad vibes time. So we're going to do a quick speed run of all of those stages. Keith's story starts in the 1960s, where he's 25. He's actually 25 this whole story. Anyway, he's a journalist in old-time Chicago. He is very, very old-fashioned, little angry boy, and he just sits in his shabby office all day writing sad news and pouting about how awful the world is. He just is not happy about anything. But later, in 1968, Keith becomes immortal by meeting the entity of want, who ends up making him the entity of greed. Entities are basically the system of gods in Keith's world that I use to explain how random people end up in big, empty, magical spaces for our roleplays. I'll explain more about them in another video. But Keith becomes an entity, and he ends up living in the capital, which is like the equivalent of Mount Olympus for the entities. And so he just lives out his days being sent off by want to go to strange worlds and possess people to be greedy, and then they're all greedy, and then he comes back, and then he does it again. And that lasts about 50 years. Want decides to just send him to this weird empty room, and that starts the next stage of his life. So this is when a random group of people appears to the room, and they're just kind of vibing there, and Keith appears, and they all just vibe in this really weird room that gives you whatever you want. And you can probably tell by how vague this is that this is where the roleplay started. But eventually, all of their exciting activity makes another entity appear, which is Destiny, aka Felicity, aka not my character, but you've seen her before on this channel. So one thing leads to another, is not that eventful. I don't know. Maybe it is, but eventually they have an enemies to lovers arc and they decide to both become human again. And Keith is now just living out his best life, acting like a really adorable, not dad, and he's just so cute. Okay, so kind of my vibes with Keith. I just like him being my little fictional buddy. All of those like different lives that he spent on random weird worlds were actually so that he could have omnipotent knowledge of every single story that I have and will write. So I can just talk to him about all of them and he knows what I'm talking about because he knows one of the characters, like he possessed one of the characters. And that's just like random canon. That's not going to be relevant in any of the stories, probably, but it's just there. And so I think that's fun. I also really like making fun of Keith. There's only like 2 people in real life that I actually make fun of, and it's not even as severely as I make fun of Keith. I think I just like, all of the traits in him that I have, I just like totally bashing him on it. I don't know why. I think it's funny. Maybe I do that too often with my characters. Give them my traits and then just like hate them for them. But I like making fun of Keith and talking to Keith, and yeah, it's fun. Another random fact about Keith is that he knows he's a fictional character. I don't know why I decided to make this canon. It's kind of like the possession thing. Like, it's not super relevant, but it sort of is, but not really. He doesn't really tell anyone about it, but, like, he knows who I am and stuff. I just decided to make all the conversations I have with him canon, so that's really fun to mess around with when I'm writing with him. So, a lot of inspiration that I have for Keith, since I just kind of made him up as I went, it's mostly just from my personal life. It's become less so, and I've put more, like, inspiration from other medias, and I'll talk about that in a second, but mostly now thematically is where it's, just kind of, like, my own personal stuff, which is, just kind of how writing works, I think. But more of his, like, story kind of inspirations is that his very early version is super, super heavily inspired by Citizen Kane. So his character is a lot like Charles Foster Kane. I am just obsessed with that movie and the character. Like, you learn so much about him, but you don't know who he is. So I just decided to pick a couple of traits and make that a character. So that's early on Keith, when he's a grumpy old man. And I even wrote a cute meet that's very similar to the cute meet that Charles has with Susan, if you know the movie. So I just really like that movie, so that's kind of my inspiration for younger Keith. And that is Keith for y'all. No, I did not ever fix his nose. This is the finished portrait. Like I said, I like making fun of him, so I think it's cute. You're welcome, Keith. The pose that he's in, that's just a pose that I love drawing him in, where it became tradition to draw him in that pose, so I thought it was fitting. Usually he has something in his hand, but today I drew him with nothing in his hand, so there's my interpretation of nothing. One last thing before I go, I decided to share my playlists that I have for some of these characters. So I'll link Keith's playlist on my Spotify. It's kind of all over the place. There's 3 very different feels. Only one of them really feels like Keith, to be honest, but you can just have fun interpreting it or whatever if you'd like, but I'll link that in the description. And I'm going to be making more of these, so please tell me who you want to hear about. I'm making a lot, so it'll just be kind of a process. But if you're really interested in hearing about someone specific next, then go ahead and tell me about it. And until then, you just have a wonderful, lovely day, and you just take the bestest care of your plants, your pets, your friends, and yourself, and go be amazing.